I'm about to share something most people never learn in their entire lifetime. The way you communicate during moments of doubt, hurt, or emotional distance can directly influence your mental health, your stress levels, and even your long term well being. After working with couples for years, I've learned that honesty doesn't come from pressure or confrontation. It comes from creating an environment where someone finally feels safe enough to stop hiding behind rehearsed explanations and actually speak from the heart. People don't open up because they're scared of being caught. They open up because they feel understood, seen, and grounded enough to express the truth without collapsing under fear or shame. Before I walk you through the 7 communication techniques that help break emotional barriers, I'm asking for one small favor. Stay with me, because if you've been struggling with silence, confusion, or sleepless nights, what you're about to learn can help restore clarity and emotional stability for both partners. Healthy communication isn't just good for relationships, it's essential for your nervous system, your cardiovascular health, your ability to sleep, and even your hormone balance. Stress from emotional uncertainty can raise cortisol levels, increase blood pressure, weaken immunity, and slowly drain your energy. But when conversations turn honest, the body begins to relax again, and healing finally starts. Now let's take the first step into these communication shifts. These aren't tricks or traps, nothing manipulative or forceful. They're gentle psychological approaches that encourage truth, reduce anxiety, and rebuild emotional safety. I've watched them help people who are overwhelmed with guilt or secrecy finally find the courage to speak openly. And I've also watched the partners on the other side finally breathe, finally understand, and finally stop imagining the worst. Real communication doesn't destroy relationships. It exposes what needs care, repair, or closure. The first communication shift is simple, calm, and deeply grounding. Instead of interrogating, instead of demanding answers, you start with a statement that allows the other person to pause, breathe, and reset. The phrase is this: I want to hear your side of things because your voice matters to me. This works because the human mind softens when it feels valued rather than cornered. When you replace accusation with invitation, defenses drop, pulse rate decreases, and honesty becomes easier. People hide things when they feel judged or afraid, but they open up when they feel safe enough to be imperfect. This approach encourages transparency without raising emotional walls. What you should watch for isn't guilt or fear, it's emotional easing. Look for the way someone's shoulders relax or how their breathing slows. When stress reduces, the brain shifts out of fight or flight and into a state where deeper truth becomes accessible. This moment isn't about catching someone, it's about giving both of you the relief of clarity. I once worked with a couple who hadn't had a real conversation in almost 6 months. When the husband used this gentle opening, his wife didn't break down or panic. She sighed, looked at him, and said, "Thank you for saying it like that." It was the first real doorway back into honesty they'd had in half a year. The second communication shift focuses on emotional safety rather than emotional pressure. The phrase is this: I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to understand what's been weighing on your mind. This works because blame activates defensiveness instantly, but understanding activates vulnerability. When someone feels they won't be attacked, they allow themselves to speak from the deeper part of their emotional experience. And that's where real truth lives, not in the surface explanations, but in the feelings underneath them. Identity-based shame shuts people down. Empathy opens them up. This approach can help a partner reveal things they've been carrying alone: stress, loneliness, regret, confusion, or emotional conflict, because they finally feel they won't be punished for being human. And in many cases, emotional isolation is more damaging to a relationship than any single mistake. I remember one woman who admitted that the hardest part wasn't what she'd done. It was the feeling that she had no emotional space to express how lost she felt. When her partner shifted from accusation to compassion, she finally felt safe enough to be honest, and that honesty allowed both of them to rebuild their connection. The third communication shift brings clarity to situations involving secrecy, avoidance, or unexplained behavior. The phrase is, I feel there's something more beneath the surface, and I want us to talk about it together. This isn't about suggesting guilt, it's about expressing emotional intuition. Humans are wired to sense when something feels off. Calling attention to that intuition in a calm, healthy way doesn't trap someone, it encourages them to stop carrying emotional weight alone. Modern life leaves digital and behavioral traces of stress long before it leaves evidence of wrongdoing. People who are overwhelmed often sleep differently, withdraw, get distracted, or become unusually guarded. Not because they're necessarily hiding betrayal, but because they're hiding emotional overload. This phrase helps someone face the weight they've been holding rather than spiraling deeper into silence. One man used this approach with his wife after noticing she was constantly drained and avoiding conversations. She didn't confess to an affair, she confessed to burnout, anxiety, and a fear of disappointing him. They ended up improving not just their relationship, but her mental health as well. Honesty can reveal wounds, not just secrets, and wounds need treatment, not accusations. Pause here, take a breath, and observe how these communication shifts work. They're not weapons, they're emotional tools designed to bring truth to the surface without harming anyone in the process. They're built on psychology, empathy, and the understanding that emotional honesty is a form of health, mental, physical, and relational. As we move deeper, the fourth communication approach becomes one of the most transformative because it acknowledges the emotional strain both partners have been carrying. The phrase is, "I can see something has been heavy on you, and it's affecting both of us. Let's talk about it before it hurts us anymore." This isn't an accusation, it's an observation rooted in empathy. When someone has been holding tension, guilt, stress, or emotional conflict, their body shows it. They may avoid eye contact, struggle to sleep, lose their appetite, become unusually quiet, or show signs of restlessness. These signals aren't proof of wrongdoing, they're proof of emotional overload. When you gently point out the visible signs of strain, you help the other person feel seen. Acknowledgement is powerful. It decreases psychological pressure, lowers cortisol levels, and allows someone to stop pretending everything is normal. I once worked with a woman who said the deepest relief she felt in her marriage came when her husband finally said, "I can tell you're not okay. I want to help, not fight." She described it as the moment her chest loosened, like someone finally opened a window in a room that had been suffocating her. This approach isn't about forcing a confession. It's about inviting a moment of truth that helps both people breathe again. The fifth communication shift focuses on the future rather than the past. It sounds like this: I want us to rebuild trust together. But we can only do that if we both speak honestly now. This approach works because hope lowers defenses. When someone believes the relationship can be repaired, they become more willing to share difficult truths. The mind relaxes when it feels there's a path forward rather than a threat of collapse. This reduces the instinct to protect themselves through silence or partial truths. When you express a desire to rebuild rather than punish, you create a healthier emotional environment, one that supports healing instead of fear. This method is also emotionally stabilizing. Couples who believe in the possibility of repair often experience lower stress hormones, improved communication patterns, and better emotional regulation. I've seen partners who were terrified to speak finally open up because they realized honesty wouldn't end everything, it might actually save it. One husband told me he learned more about his wife's emotional needs in a single honest conversation than in the previous 3 years of avoidance. It wasn't easy for them, but it brought clarity, and clarity is the foundation of renewal. The sixth communication shift returns to identity, but in a supportive way rather than a confrontational one. The phrase is, "I miss the version of us who used to talk freely without fear. I want us to find our way back to that." This works because it speaks to shared history rather than individual mistakes. It reminds both partners of the bond they used to have, the honesty they once shared, and the emotional safety that existed before stress or distance built walls between them. Humans are deeply influenced by identity continuity, the desire to stay connected to who they once were. When you frame honesty as a return to something familiar and comforting, rather than a confrontation, it softens the emotional atmosphere. Many people hide their truth not because they're deceptive by nature, but because they're scared of disappointing someone they love. By reminding them of who you both once were, you help reduce that fear. I once worked with a couple married for over a decade. When the husband said, "I miss how open we used to be," his wife burst into tears. Not because she was guilty of anything, but because she felt trapped by her own fear of judgment. That single moment helped them rebuild not through blame, but through mutual vulnerability. They realized they weren't fighting each other, they were fighting the emotional distance that had grown between them. The seventh communication shift involves gently acknowledging that you've taken steps to understand the situation rather than relying on assumptions. It sounds like this: "I've gotten clarity from a few things I've noticed, but I want to hear your truth from your own heart." This approach removes the need for guesswork and encourages openness without cornering anyone. It tells the other person you're not blindly imagining things, you're perceptive, but you're also compassionate enough not to jump to conclusions. Humans fear being misunderstood more than almost anything else. When you show that you're open to hearing their perspective directly, you create emotional safety. This helps someone choose honesty voluntarily rather than out of panic. Many people don't speak up because they believe their words will be twisted or dismissed. By inviting them to give their version openly, you create room for clarity, healing, and emotional transparency. In one situation I observed, a husband approached his wife with this gentle clarity. She didn't confess to infidelity. Instead, she confessed to hiding severe work stress, financial worries, and the fear that she was failing as a partner. What he thought was distance caused by secrecy was actually distance caused by overwhelm. Once they talked openly, everything changed. They were able to support each other again, and the emotional fog that had been clouding their connection lifted almost immediately. Take a moment to reflect on how these communication shifts work. None of them are aggressive. None of them are designed to trap, expose, or break someone down. Instead, they're crafted to reduce anxiety, encourage emotional safety, and create the conditions for honest conversation, something every relationship needs to stay healthy and grounded. Now that you've learned all 7 communication shifts, it's important to understand why they work. Not as tactics, not as pressure points, but as emotional doorways. When someone has been holding back the truth, whether it's about stress, guilt, doubt, or personal struggles, their mind is usually in a constant state of tension. This tension affects their sleep, their appetite, their concentration, and even their physical health. Honest conversation doesn't just improve a relationship, it reduces the internal pressure that slowly wears a person down. These shifts work because they create calm, grounded moments where the nervous system finally stops bracing for conflict and allows honesty to rise. You are not trying to control anyone. You are trying to create a healthier emotional space where both partners can speak without fear. The real purpose behind these communication adjustments is to protect your mental well-being and support the emotional safety of the person you love. When both individuals feel safe enough to be honest, the entire dynamic changes. Stress levels drop, misunderstandings clear, the heavy tension in the room dissolves, and a relationship that once felt impossible to repair can suddenly start to breathe again. But these approaches also come with a responsibility. You must be ready for whatever truth comes to the surface, whether it's about hidden emotional struggles, unspoken resentment, burnout, or past mistakes. Honesty can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the first step toward healing. What matters most is how you respond. If you create a space where truth is met with calmness rather than chaos, both of you will feel more grounded, more respected, and more understood. People often assume that silence means disinterest or deception, but most of the time, silence is a symptom of emotional fear. Fear of disappointing you, fear of being misunderstood, fear of starting a conflict that neither person is emotionally prepared to handle. These communication shifts help dissolve that fear. When the emotional threat feels lower, transparency becomes more natural. The brain stops protecting itself and begins to trust the environment again. I've watched countless couples move from resentment to relief simply because one partner chose to speak with intention rather than frustration. A man once told me that after weeks of anxiety, he sat down with his wife, used the calm language we've talked about, and for the first time, she shared everything she'd been holding in. Her stress at work, her fear of not being good enough, her exhaustion from carrying responsibilities alone. None of it was what he had imagined in his mind. He said the truth wasn't painful. The silence was. Once the silence broke, their entire home felt lighter. This is why communication tied to empathy is so powerful. It doesn't chase confessions, it invites truth. And when truth comes willingly, it becomes healing instead of damaging. You aren't just learning to protect yourself, you're learning how to protect the emotional well-being of both people in the relationship. That's what real connection looks like. If these communication approaches opened your eyes to what healthy clarity looks like, consider taking the next step to strengthen your emotional confidence. When you understand how to speak calmly, listen fully, and create a supportive environment, you become someone who can navigate difficult moments without losing yourself. You become someone who can protect your peace even in the middle of uncertainty. And you become someone who can guide your relationship with steadiness instead of fear. Your emotional health matters. Your peace matters. And your ability to communicate clearly and compassionately is one of the strongest tools you will ever have. Whether you're trying to repair a relationship, understand the truth, or simply build an environment where honesty is the natural response rather than the frightening one. If this helped you feel more grounded or gave you a new way to approach the conversations you've been avoiding, keep learning, keep improving, and keep taking small steps toward healthier communication. Those small steps become the turning points that save relationships, restore trust, and rebuild the emotional balance you deserve.